Welcome back. This is going to be part 2 of Ryan Heller's story, King of Stars. If you didn't get to listen to part 1, I encourage you to stop right now, go back and listen to part 1. It was put out yesterday. It is a phenomenal story. I'm excited to share the rest of it with you guys today. If you're enjoying Ryan's story, if you're enjoying the stories that we are cultivating and collecting here at LGBT Stories, I encourage you to help and show your love and gratitude. Go over to our website, our lgbtstories.com, and donate to the show anything from $1 to $100 or more. It helps. When you're at our website, just click donate in the menu and PayPal will take it from there. Also, if you haven't yet filled out our survey, we really want to learn more about who our listeners are. There's a link in the description of this episode. You can click that. It's a 5-minute survey. We're giving away a $50 gift card to one lucky winner. So go over there, fill out the survey, tell us a little bit about yourself. If you don't want to share your name, you can do it completely anonymously. You do not have to share your name or personal information. Thanks, guys. This is part 2 of King of Stars. You're listening to LGBT Stories during one of our hiatus months. What this means is that we are resting and we're prepping for the new year ahead. There won't be any new episodes of our show until February of 2020. However, I would never leave you all high and dry like that. This hiatus, it leaves room for us to grow and to share some of our best of episodes that we've had on this show over the years. So thanks for tuning in, and we hope that if you haven't heard these episodes, that you find them just as moving as we did so many years ago. And if you've listened to the show from the very beginning, well, I'm so happy that you're still here, and I hope that these episodes, they bring you back to a place of nostalgia. I hope that your holiday season is filled with joy, and I cannot wait for you to see what we have lined up for next year. Thanks for listening, and enjoy the show. We return today with part 2 of Ryan's story. We last left off as Ryan was explaining how life began to shift for him. While this shift was short-lived, you'll see that there's still more for him to learn about himself. In part 1, we left off as Ryan was explaining how writing had changed his life. He explained how writing was his outlet. It was the way that he was able to discover his higher self. It's this self that helps Ryan get through the next chapter in his life. For those of you listening, I do understand that you might not have or ever will go through some of the things that Ryan has talked about or will talk about. But what I always find to be so interesting is that we don't have to experience the same external factors to be able to relate to someone's pain or joys. We all know what pain feels like. And we all know what joy feels like. It's this that roots my belief that though we as a society may feel very divided, that we truly are not. Let's pick back up on Ryan's story, where he left off talking about his sexual patterns while in college. Remember, try to keep an open mind and try to see where or what you might be able to relate to, so that when necessary in your life, you might be able to act from a place of love and understanding.
I gave in to all of it, and I started to meet older men online and let them do things to me sexually for money. Um, and I guess it's prostitution. I never viewed it that way. Um, because for me, it was almost just like, why not? If I'm going to meet people online anyway and have sex with them, I might as well take money for it. I didn't need it. I didn't necessarily want to do this, but I didn't care. I didn't care about myself. And there's one part that I wrote about in my book. Um, and all of this, mind you, all of this was some of the most shameful things that I carried around that I did not share with anybody. Um, and it wasn't until I eventually went into rehab later on and realized that I wasn't alone in doing these things, um, that I began to feel the courage to talk about it. When I realized that I wasn't alone is when I realized that people who have gone through these things, people who struggle, we need a voice so we don't feel like we're alone, because um, that loneliness only keeps us shackled tighter. And so I remember one time specifically where I contacted somebody, or somebody contacted me online and gave him a price for me. And I drove out, and it was really far. I was in Tallahassee for college at this point, and I drove probably 45 minutes, and it was like dark roads, dirt roads, like a horror movie, and thinking to myself, I could die. Nobody knows where I am. I'm going to some stranger's house in the middle of like nowhere, and I could very well die. And I was okay with that. I was at that point, you know, why not? Why the fuck not? And I went, and every part of me was saying, don't do it, turn around, don't do it. And then there's that devil on my shoulder, that dark cloud that is grown in my head to take over my thinking by that age, that just fogs out that little voice in me that always tried to look out for me. Um, I learned how to silence that voice. And so I met this man, and 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 he was in this little rundown like shack, dilapidated, this old scrawny man who undressed in front of me in his little tidy whities. And I just remember the room was orange, and he brought me into his bed, and just I was I was like the 14-year-old kid who was getting raped in his parents' house while they were asleep, laying on my bed, staring at the ceiling, gone. It was just the actions are automatic at this point, and we fooled around, and I collected the money, and I went on my way, and I think that's so important, because here's somebody that was so anti everything that I was attracted to in a situation that I knew was so wrong for me to be in, and could die, and felt so abused then and taken advantage of and disgusting. And I left feeling like, nice, I've got this money, I'm okay, and I kept contradicting how I felt about myself. It was pitiful, and then this high that followed it. And I think that's the addictive side of me that gets this rush from doing these things. And then I'm left, it's like after the alcoholic or the drug addict goes through their high, they're left feeling shame and disgust. And so what do? You get high again to block it back out. And that's what I did over and over. And eventually I had a brief stint with crystal meth, and it was talk about insane. That was euphoria, chaos, and I had a nervous breakdown after that because it had all caught up with me. And I called my parents while I was in Tallahassee, a mess. I was going to kill myself. Couldn't even formulate words. I had hit the lowest of the low I had ever been. I was beaten, broken. I was a shell of the person that I ever could have been, used to be. I felt like I had let that little kid down, that little kid who played in his room and that wanted to be this famous actor. I had disappointed him. I was a failure. I was failing school. And so my parents said, "Get home now. Come home. We're gonna take care of you." And I did. I left college and I never went back. I got a medical withdrawal from my psychologist, and I withdrew from college, and I went home, and I was like a 21-year-old living in his parents' house again. And I fell right back into old patterns, using drugs, and it all caught up with me. I took 8 full bars of Xanax, blacked out, went driving, apparently stopped on the side of the road. I don't remember any of this. This was in a police report because I was arrested for a DWI. The police found me parked on the side of the road. I'm sorry, the police found me pulled over on the side of the road with my foot on the gas, and asked me to put the car in park, and I did not know how to do that. It was 3 a.m. I was in a community residence, a residential community, and a neighbor had seen me and called to complain about suspicious activity, and I was brought to jail. I watched the police video, and I failed every sobriety test miserably, by the way. It was pitiful. But what blew me away watching that video was the only thing I seemed to care about was getting my cigarettes. I didn't care that I was being arrested. I didn't care what was happening. I just wanted my cigarettes. And so my parents had to bail me out of jail. It was the next day, at whatever time in the morning. I think it was like 4, 5 in the morning, 24 hours later. They said I called them from the jail, still in a blackout, so I didn't know where I was. I didn't know what was happening. I could barely speak. And at that time, my mother had to wake up her attorney friends who had connections in the police force to track me down and find me, which was like the things I put my parents through. I didn't realize till much later how awful they really were. But I would imagine embarrassing for her, shameful for her. But they picked me up, and I went back home, and I sobered up for a while after that. But the one thing about shame and guilt is I realized if you don't deal with the shame and guilt, you're always stuck with it, and it's always going to creep back, and it's always going to bring you back down. And I saw a psychologist for many years, and I would never talk about the things that I'm talking to you about right now. It was always surface level things about how my day went, because I could never go there. I could never go deeper. I could never say I got raped. I could never say I hated myself for being gay. I could never say that I was doing drugs, and that I couldn't stop. I could never say that I wanted to be alone and I didn't like people and I just didn't want to exist in this world anymore and that I felt like a failure. everything was okay. Everything was always fine. That was my answer. Everything is fine. And that's how my life went. I would get sober, and then I would relapse and get sober and relapse and fall into bad relationships and have random sex with people because that's what I knew how to do, and do a lot of drugs. And that went on for years. I wish it didn't. I wish I could say that there was something so much more beautiful that happened, but that went on for years. And the biggest turning point started when I finally graduated college. I went back to community college and then graduated, finished my degree in graphic design. It took 8 years for me to graduate with a BFA in graphic design. I applied for a job at a design studio that I admired the work and went for an interview. I was a mess, but I was a controlled mess at that point. I was functioning. And I did not know that I was interviewing for the job with my future husband. And I met Chris. He owned the company. I applied for a graphic designer position, and I got the job. It was an awkward interview because there was definitely some kind of weird tension. And Chris and I became friends. We became friends in a way that I hadn't connected with another person in a very long time, if ever. And we started to tell each other everything. He was in a relationship for 10 years with an alcoholic. and we started to talk about my past, and I gave him like my past light, like the light diet version of my past, and skimmed over it because I wasn't going to reveal those secrets to him, because I could barely reveal them to myself. And we hit it off, and we became close. And he asked me if my drugs and alcohol were still a problem, and I assured him it absolutely was not. I was not using drugs anymore. And in my mind, I wasn't. I was taking prescription pills like painkillers, which for whatever reason I justified as not doing drugs because I was, who knows, it wasn't an illegal substance, even though I was buying it illegally. Addicts have a great way of manipulating themselves, best of all. And so Chris and I eventually got into a relationship, and we started to date. He got out of his 10-year relationship. We moved in together. And I thought that I had finally had everything I ever said that I wanted my whole life. I had this beautiful relationship with somebody who cared about me and who loved me. I had a job that I really enjoyed, working at something that I felt passionately about. I had 2 dogs now that I love to death, and I always wanted a dog and never had one growing up. I had a house with this man that I was living with, and I thought I had all these superficial things that made me happy. And the drugs, they crept back in quickly and hard. And I have this way of, when things are going well in my life, I self-sabotage. It's like there's this built-in mechanism that when I'm finally feeling something good about myself, I have to destroy it because I don't feel like I deserve it. And honestly, I'm not used to feeling good. I'm not used to feeling comfortable in life. I'm used to fighting. I'm used to pain. I'm used to crying. I'm used to the dark stuff. So when I feel even a sliver of happiness, it's almost like subconsciously I want to rid myself of it because I don't know what to do with it. I know what to do with the uncomfortable. I know what to do with the pain. I can write about it. I can bask in it and feel sorry for myself, because then I have a platform to stand on and I know what to do. But I started to lie to Chris and find ways to sneak out of the house. I'd make up these elaborate excuses that I was going, across the street to get gas at 9 p.m. at night, when really I was going to meet my drug dealer. And he would wonder, Ryan, why is it taking you an hour to get gas across the street? And I'd come up with these elaborate stories of, oh, I met this person that I used to know there. We bumped into each other and we talked forever. And then I wanted to, drive around and listen to music in my car. And, it was one lie after another after another. And that, I mean, after so long, especially when you're living with somebody, the lies catch up to you. And he walked into the bathroom one night, and I had my face in a plate because I was snorting Adderall. And he drew the line in the sand, and he said, "That's it. If you can't get your shit together, I'm done." And I swore up and down, I will stop. I'm going to get it together. I'm done. I'm done. I'm done. I love you. Don't worry about it. I had every reason why I was sorry. And I'm sure it was weeks, maybe a month later, he caught me again. I was on Adderall prescribed by a doctor, so it seemed perfectly justified, and Klonopin, and he started to realize that my pills were just, I'd get a prescription and it was gone within 3 days, and so he would hide it from me, and I'd find it and take it all. And he told me to get out of the house, and he kicked me out. And my parents were out of town, and I drove to their house. I broke in, and I proceeded to take all of their prescription pain pills that my dad had for his back. I ate them all, and I blacked out. And hours later, Chris got a hold of me, freaking out. He was worried what had happened to me. And I assured him I was fine and that I just needed to come home and we would work it out. And I drove home in a blackout. I got home. He knew what was going on. And he said, that we were done and he had had enough. And he broke up with me. And everything I ever wanted, that life that I dreamed of, was gone. Instantly, it was gone. And I had never, at that point, wanted something so bad, wanted to fix it, wanted to hold on with every finger I had onto him. And he said that I needed to get help if he was going to stay with me. I had to go to rehab, and I had to tell my parents what I did. And I begrudgingly, I did. My parents came back from vacation. They came to our house. I skirted around the subject at first, and then eventually told them, after Chris willed it, that I broke into their house, I took their pain pills, and that this has been a problem for months again. And I had to go to rehab, and I did. And I went to rehab July 5th, 2011. And my grandmother died July 2nd, 2011. And that date became so important again because on July 2nd, she died July 2nd, 1999. And on July 2nd, 2011, I made the decision to go to rehab. And I remember being in our bedroom, and I started to talk to my aunt, and I told her what was going on and that I was going to go to rehab. And she said how disappointed my grandparents, especially my grandmother, would have been with me with everything that had been happening in my life. And for some reason, in that moment, those words are exactly what I needed to hear, because I had what people talk about in AA as this spiritual moment. And it was the first time I had ever felt a dagger of truth pierced my heart. And it was like light finally began to seep through this broken shell of my body. And I started to cry uncontrollably. I couldn't stop crying, like the kind of crying where you are heaving to get breath. And I got off the phone with my aunt, and I just broke down in the bathroom. I closed the door, turned off the lights, and it was like being in the closet as when I was a kid. I was locking myself in for shelter, in the dark, in a safe place, crying hysterically. And I couldn't stop thinking about my grandmother. And I felt so strongly in my body that she was with me right then. Felt like her spirit was there. And for whatever reason, I got down on my knees and I started to pray. And I am by no means a religious person. It was not part of my upbringing. God was never a factor in my life. But I got down on my knees and I started to pray. And my grandmother was in my head, and I started to talk to her. And it was like a wave of relief just washed over my body. And that uncontrollable heaving, crying just so gracefully transformed into laughter. And for the first time, I felt like it's going to be okay. Everything is not fine, and that is okay. And I remember in that dark bathroom, through the closed door, I heard Chris laughing and playing with our puppy. And I realized, finally, that everything I ever wanted, my whole life, is on the other side of that door. And I'm trapped in a fucking dark bathroom like I used to do all the time, hiding. All I have to do is walk outside into the light and just start fresh, one foot in front of the other. And when you are that low, putting one foot in front of the other seems like the hardest thing to do. It's the scariest thing. It feels like there's no hope, like nothing will ever change in your life. But it is as simple as putting one foot in front of the other and opening a door and making a decision to change your path. And I did. For whatever reason, I did for the first time in my life. And in retrospect, it's so much easier to talk about in black and white and say this happened and this happened and this happened. At the time, I didn't realize that's what I was doing, but I was doing it. And I went to rehab, and everything changed. And it's not like you go to rehab, you get help, and that's it. There's so much work involved in that. But in rehab, it was the first time I was amongst people who were broken, who understood what I was going through, and I could identify with. And that is why sharing our stories is so important, to connect, to reach out a hand, pat somebody on the back and say, it's okay, you are not alone. And that's what happened for me in rehab. One of the largest changes came when I realized that some of the guys in rehab were they were like poking fun that I was gay, and amongst themselves talking about who had to share the bunk with me, and the gay kid, and I felt like I was in middle school again, and I took that kind of stuff for probably 2 weeks in rehab. And finally it got to the point we were in a group session and we were having to do this exercise where we placed a hand on another person, whispered something positive in their ear, and then moved on to the next person and did that, and the next and the next. And I could see that the guys were uncomfortable touching me and whispering something in my ear, and that they were making faces at each other. And when the counselor at the end of the exercise said, "What did you get out of it, Ryan?" I broke. I broke down for the first time and stood up for myself and called these guys out and said, "I'm gay. That does not mean that I am attracted to you, that I want to do anything to you. It is something I've always struggled with my whole life and that I've never accepted about myself. And I am not here to feel bad about myself. I'm here to feel good about myself." And whatever I said, and I don't remember exactly, but for the first time, I stood up for me. And I think that's when I started to finally peel back layers of shame and accept the fact that I'm gay, that I'm a homosexual, and that doesn't mean anything beyond the fact that like I am sexually attracted to somebody of the same sex. The end. Doesn't mean that I walk a certain way. It doesn't mean that I talk a certain way. It doesn't mean that I like one thing over another. It just means that, you know, I'm married to a guy. And that's it. And it was a turning point for me to start accepting myself. I wish that I could say that that was the end and I stopped doing drugs and life was great after that, but it's not. And the beautiful thing about our personal stories is that we have chapters and that chapters continue. And when it's over and we're gone and we're dead and that's it. But up to that point, there's always another page to turn. And my chapter on drug addiction wasn't done. 6 months later, I was at my husband Chris's family's house in Pennsylvania for the holidays. And I wasn't working an AA program very well. I wasn't dedicating myself to any big change. I was just not using drugs. And we were at his parents' house for Christmas. It was December 25th. And Chris and I were alone in the house. His family was on their way back. And there was a bottle of painkillers in the kitchen counter. And I saw that thing the minute that we got there. And for days I had been eyeing it, but like, don't touch it, just avoid it. And I kept it to myself. I didn't call my sponsor about it. I didn't talk to Chris about it. I didn't say, "Would you please put it away?" So Christmas night, Chris and I are alone in his parents' house, and I start manipulating and get Chris to go upstairs. He goes to the bathroom. I'm in the kitchen, like being on autopilot. I walk over, grab the bottle, twist off the cap, and there are no thoughts in my head. It's just action, and that pain pill is in my mouth. And I'm silently screwing the cap back on. And all of a sudden I hear, "What the fuck are you doing?" And I turn around and Chris watched the whole thing and he caught me. And I've never felt my heart sink as low as it sank the moment that I looked into his eyes and saw the depth of pain that he had and betrayal and sadness in his eyes, to watch the person he loved and was just starting to build any kind of trust back, to watch me on Christmas at his parents' house sneaking drugs. The snowball effect after that was astronomical, and Chris was telling me that it was time for me to find a flight and to fly back to Florida. He said that was it. We were done. He promised when I was in rehab that he has drawn the line in the sand and he will give me no more exceptions, and I cross the line and that's it. And, you know, hours later, I confessed to his parents what had happened. I called my sponsor. My sponsor said, tell them, be honest. For once in your life, own your shit. And that is probably some of the best advice I had ever been given. Own your shit. And I went down and I mean, I must have crawled down those stairs because I was petrified. And I told them, I'm really sorry. And they had this look of confusion. What are you talking about? And I said, I took your pain pills, and I'm really sorry that I stole from you and that I relapsed at your house. And in that moment, I expected them to tell me to get out of their house. And his mother came over and gave me a hug and a kiss. And it was a moment where love triumphed, and it was an act of just grace. And that taught me so much. Eventually, Chris and I talked, and we smoothed it over to an extent. I mean, it was a rocky path, but he let me back in, and I committed myself to AA. I immediately started going to meetings, picked up a white chip, and I worked the 12 steps. And I'm not an AA thumper, and I don't practice that program top notch by any means, but I take my recovery seriously because I know what it feels like to lose everything, and I know what it feels like now to have everything. And I say that not on a superficial level, but on a much more spiritual level today, because realizing that I have everything that I have ever wanted in my life is not a house, it's not a car, it's not a husband. It is 100% me. It is being able to say from the bottom of my heart that I love myself, that I accept who I am today. And that came from honesty. That came from working a program where I was forced to look at myself, where I was forced to look at my shame, look at my guilt, and be honest about it. To share it with another person, get it off my chest, and start over. To finally find something in my life that I believed in that is not me, that is not drugs and alcohol. Whether I call it God or not, it doesn't matter. I have a faith in something. I don't even know exactly what it is. I just know from the bottom of my heart that everything happens for a reason, that every step we take has significance. I know that everything that's happened in my life brought me to being right here to communicate these words. I know that I am so unbelievably grateful to have had the journey that I've had and the journey that I will continue to have. And it's both light and it's both dark, and there has to be that balance, because without that balance, we have nothing. Without the dark, I'll never appreciate the light, and vice versa. Last year, after 4 years of sobriety, Chris and I finally got married, and it was a beautiful wedding in Pennsylvania, surrounded by our friends, by our family, in an old barn from the 1800s in a town called Intercourse, Pennsylvania, which is hilarious. And it's a night that I smile about just talking about it, because I never thought that I would be worthy of being married. I never thought that anybody would love me enough to want to spend their life with me. And I feel so lucky and privileged to have somebody now who stands by me and who has stood by me in my darkest times and in my happiest times. because I finally learned, after so long, I think how to coexist with another person, how to love somebody other than myself. But to get to that point it's taken stumbling, it's taken falling on my face, it's taken being dragged through the gutter, it's taken, I'll tell you, one of the greatest things I've done, I think, for me, has been writing King of Stars. And I say that because it was me at my most vulnerable, sharing everything that I never thought I could share with another human being. It was me sharing every dark corner and every skeleton in every closet that I've had and accumulated my whole life. Which, let me tell you, it's not easy and it's scary, especially knowing that my family would read it. I started by writing journal entries, which then turned into blogs, just sharing these feelings and sharing these stories that I've talked about. Some I have, some I haven't talked to you guys about, but talking about it, because like I've said, that was such an important moment for me to realize that I'm not alone in this journey, and to be able to put into words all of the feelings and emotions and the shame and the guilt, the insecurities and the fear and the self-doubt and the struggle and the pain, along with the beauty, along with the spirituality, along with the light and the love, to be able to share that and say, basically, to whomever, my name is Ryan. I don't need to hide. This is who I am. All the scars, all the flaws, all the fuck ups and the zits and whatever it is, this is me. I don't need to pretend that I'm something that I'm not, because I'm so scared that you're going to think, oh, you snuck men into your room when you were 14, or you had sex for money, or you used a copious amount of drugs in your life that could probably make Courtney Love blush. I don't need to hold on to these things anymore, because they happened. They've made me who I am, and I'm finally proud of the person that I am today. And that's taken me a long time to be able to honestly say that. And I'm so happy that I can finally say that that I love myself, and not feel like that's egotistical or narcissistic. It's human. It's human to love yourself, and it's human to be proud of yourself, and it's human to feel, whether it's feelings of shame or guilt or love and happiness. It's what makes us us, and it's what makes us beautiful. All the stories, all the experiences, all the feelings. It's why we're here, right? And we're here not to keep it all to ourselves, but to share it, to connect, especially with where we are today as a society and a culture, to lift each other up instead of hold each other down. For kids who are banging their heads against walls and thinking that their only option is suicide, share your story, find your voice, because it's okay. I think that's the most important thing. It's okay. And even if everything is not fine, that's good. Because if everything was fine all the time, what are you here for? You might as well kick up your heels and go 6 feet under, because then it's over. There's nothing left to learn. There's no more growth to be had. I think life is a beautiful thing, and I think our stories have so much merit and so much value, and it makes us who we are.
If everything was fine all the time, then what are you here for? Ryan poses a really good question. Is life really about simplicity? Are we meant to reach a particular place in life? And what is that place? Who defines that place? I'd like to think that I'm more like Ryan. That we are ever changing. And that what we go through in life, that's what shapes the person that we are today. In Ryan's story, we hear about his struggles with addiction to drugs, the difficulties that he experienced surrounding sexual acting out, feelings of low self-worth, and in the end, his appreciation for what he's gained from it all. In the end, he's able to see a stronger, more vibrant self. So I would say this to the anti-LGBT community. To those of you struggling with understanding the LGBT community, those of you who are having a difficult time accepting your LGBT child, mother, father, or any other relative, how do you feel about the notion to no longer look at them as LGBT, but as the human being that they are? If society begins to see that people who identify as LGBT are who they are based off of what's inside their soul, well, then I have complete faith that we'll all be able to just look past the labels. I encourage you to write into our show. I would love to further this conversation and share your responses. Remember, anything you say in your emails to us can be done anonymously. Just make sure that you note that when writing in. If you are someone who's listening to today's episode and you're struggling to accept your own sexuality, I invite you to write into us. Tell us what's going on, and I personally will contact you to provide you with any resources that I can to assist you in bettering your situation. I know personally what you're going through, and I'm here to be of service to you and our community. Thank you so much for listening today, guys. Remember, head over to ourLGBTstories.com, pick up some merchandise, donate to the show. And if you guys also would like to support us over on YouTube, we are currently migrating all the content here in podcast land over to YouTube, and we are working on some new projects over there. In the meantime, that's a slow process, but it is coming along. What we need is 100 people to subscribe to the channel so that we can get an official custom URL issued to us through YouTube. Right now I have set up a shortened URL, which is bit.ly/LGBT YouTube. That link will be posted in the show notes, so you guys can just click that and subscribe to our channel over on YouTube. Once we hit 100 subscribers, and we're on our way there on YouTube, we will be able to create a custom URL, and that way it'll be much easier for everyone to find the show. And in the meantime, just be active. Join us on Facebook, our private Facebook group. All of the links to our social media is going to be there. Our Instagram is currently being moved over to my personal Instagram page. There's, as we're changing things up, we realize there's not much of a reason to have a whole separate one. So all of that's going to be at kevingerdes.com. And yes, things are changing, but hang in there with us because we have a lot coming up next year in 2020. New episodes will drop in February. As you know, every Monday until February, you guys are going to get some of the best episodes of LGBT stories that haven't been heard in years. And honestly, they're the foundation of this show. Thank you all for listening. Please rate and subscribe to the show in iTunes. Follow us on YouTube and head over to Instagram at Kevin Gerdes. All of those links in the show notes below. Thanks, guys. Have a great day. And remember, keep loving one another.